because we do have over 40 million acres of lawn, which is an area bigger than New England. If everybody cut their lawn in half, that'd give us 20 million acres that we could restore at home, which is a bigger area than all the big national parks combined.
Hold on to your seats because you're about to hear from Doug Tallamy. And so I know you're going to love this podcast. Enjoy it. Share with a friend. Go to the show notes. We need to spread his message far and wide. Welcome to the Wild Herbs Podcast, where we unpack and uncover the healing properties of wild herbs so you can heal naturally with the plants beneath your feet. I am your host, April Punsalan, wild untamed plant lady, also a botanist, an ethnobotanist, and herbalist dedicated to teaching you how to heal with plants. If you want to learn edible and medicinal plants, you are in the right place, my friend. Welcome to the Wild Herb Podcast. I'm beyond honored to welcome a true visionary and the conservation world, Doug Tallamy. You are in for a special treat. So Doug is a New York Times best-selling author. He is a professor. He is an entomologist. And he's an ecologist and a conservationist. And he's the co-founder of Homegrown National Park. And Doug has really started a movement across the country helping people transform their yards into thriving ecosystems. So after today's podcast, I know you are going to be super pumped to use some of the tips that Doug gives you to turn your yard into a thriving ecosystem that will make sure that we all stay on this planet a little bit longer. So thank you so much, Doug, for coming and for your time. And I cannot wait for listeners to hear your message.
Well, you are welcome, and thanks for the opportunity.
So you have truly sparked a conservation movement that we can all jump in and be a part of, which I think is phenomenal. And you are really helping people transform their yards. And there are a million questions, of course, as a conservationist and a former botanist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that I want to ask you. But when I started to think about what is the best question, the first question, it's really in your heart because you're a trained entomologist. You have a master's of science in entomology. You have a PhD in entomology. But you are now this very, revolutionary conservationist. And so when did this spark, this conservation spark, happen in your heart? Can you remember?
Yeah, I can remember. But first I want to point out I am not the only one who's talking about this. A lot of people are talking about it. So I'm just one of the many voices. But yeah, I am a trained entomologist. One of the things that we learned in graduate school was how insects interact with plants. It's a big field. It's called plant-insect interactions. And probably the most important message is that plants defend themselves from insects, and they do it in lots of ways, but the most powerful way is with nasty tasting chemicals. So any insect that eats a plant has to be able to get around those chemicals, has to be able to tolerate them, to deactivate them. And that usually takes long periods of specialization. So host plant specialization is the key to how insects use plants. And the monarch butterfly is a perfect example there. Milkweeds are toxic plants. Most insects cannot eat them. But monarchs have all the adaptations necessary to get around the cardiac glycosides that are in milkweeds and the sticky latex sap. So that's what they eat. But in evolving all of those adaptations, they were focused on milkweeds. They weren't focused on the tannins and oaks or the cucurbitacins and cucurbits or anything else. So it locks them into eating that particular plant lineage. The important point there is if we take that lineage away, we lose the monarch. And that is true for 90% of the insects that eat plants on the planet. So a lot of people say, well, that's good. We don't want insects. But actually we do. They're the little things that run the world. And if you lose your insects, you lose your birds, you lose all kinds of other things. So what got me started was I'm actually a behavioral ecologist, and I spent a lot of time working with insect parental care and how beetles choose their mates and interesting things. But nobody cares about that stuff. In 2000, my wife and I moved into, it was a 10-acre lot on a farm that was broken up. It's a very old farm, been farmed over 300 years. And the last thing they did was mow it for hay. And then they just gave up and they sold 10-acre lots, and we got one of those. So it was pretty barren, not much there. And our goal was to restore that. Our real goal was to get me closer to the university so I didn't have to drive an hour. But so it was mowed for hay, but there was, we had to build the house. We had to, sign papers. It had to transfer from one owner to two others. It got complicated. And it was actually 3 years after they stopped mowing before we moved in. And in that 3 years, all of the rootstocks that had been mowed for hay, it's really the invasive plants, the autumn olive and the multiflora rose and the oriental bittersweet and all those things we know about. So when you stop mowing, that's what comes back. And when we actually moved in, it was 10 acres of just solid invasives. Uh,
Mm.
so right away I reckoned, okay, this is a serious problem. I hadn't, I knew about invasive species before that, but I didn't. There just wasn't a lot of talk about it. This was the year 2000, and just to walk around the property, I had to cut paths through all these vines and everything else. And I'm an entomologist, so you're looking around to see what insects are there all the time. And the first thing I notice is, hey, there aren't any insects on these plants from Asia compared to, there were little black cherries and baby oaks and things that were trying to squeeze in there. Um, I said, well, gee, this would make a good undergraduate research project. I was not surprised to hear about this because, of course, we knew about host plant specialization, and there's no way an insect from North America can specialize on a plant from China if it's never seen it before. So I thought this was old news, not all that interesting. There was a young woman in our department who wanted to try research. And I said, come to my house and measure insect use of natives and non-native plants, but first go to the literature and see what's been done. And she came back a couple days later and said, I can't find anything. Well, she's an undergrad. I didn't think she didn't know how to look in the literature. So I looked, and there is a big long list of why invasive plants are not so good. But wrecking the
Mhm.
was not on that list, which really surprised me. So I wrote a couple of grants. I wrote an NSF grant and a USDA grant, and I got both of them, which is really surprising. And that told me my peers weren't thinking about this either.
Mm.
That's what changed the direction. I gave up
Mm.
cucumber beetles, chose their mates, and I started. I said we've got to measure the impact of these non-native plants, whether they're invasive or not. There's a lot of ornamentals, crepe myrtle and lilacs and forsythia. They're in our yards. They're not moving around, but they're also not supporting the local insect fauna. So, what is the impact of that? What are the impacts on the birds and other parts of the food webs? It was so you're looking for a single event. It was walking through my property shortly after we
Mm.
that convinced me we have a real issue here.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that is important research looking at how, insects are on non-natives versus natives. And I'm glad that your path led you there. And so you're able to do this important work and teach us and open up. Because sometimes I think as scientists, we get so pigeoned in and we're looking at such a small thing and no, not the public doesn't really benefit from that small thing. I know our close group of peers benefit from it, but not the larger world. And now your work is really impacting, the larger world and the message is spreading and you're doing a lot of good for millions of species. So you are the co-founder of Homegrown National Park, which I did just enter my property. And so when we get towards the end of the podcast, I want to ask you a couple questions about that, of how to actually log in what is native, because right now my yard says 0%. But anyhow, you have done that work. And before we jump in to the Homegrown National Park, because you listening right now, I really want you to have some gold nuggets to take with you after this podcast. And I want you, and I beg you to implement some of the things that Doug is going to teach you and recommend to you. I want, though, you listening, because you may not have a conservation or biology background like Doug and I do. We understand, carrying capacity. We understand what's going on with the earth. We know it's the Earth's sixth massive extinction, but you may not know that we're facing the Earth's sixth massive extinction right now. And so, Doug, can you tell the listeners, or the person listening right now, we're talking to you, can you tell them what is going on with the earth? Can you explain it through the lens of maybe mention carrying capacity, or you have a lot of statistics, when you start your presentations. And I think it really does set the stage for why the person listening needs to implement what you are going to tell them to do today. So can you educate them?
Sure. Yeah. Course in ecology in 2 minutes. We are products of nature. We humans are products of nature. We are totally dependent on the life support that healthy ecosystems provide. We call them ecosystem services, and they create all the conditions that allow life and us to thrive. And that's whether you live in a city, it's whether you live in the suburbs, you're still using Earth's resources to stay alive in this planet. The most simple one that we can talk about is oxygen. It's plants that make oxygen. They control our weather. They're sequestering carbon dioxide. They're saving topsoil. Just an endless list of things that plants and then the animals that those plants support are doing that we depend on. But the earth is finite. It's limited. We do not have an endless supply of resources. So when any population exceeds the resources in a particular area, we say it's over the carrying capacity, the ability of that area to support that population. People tend to think about carrying capacity in terms of single species, like how many people can we jam onto the planet before what? Before it collapses? I mean, is that the goal? I like to look at carrying capacity in terms of its impact on the entire ecosystem. When a single species exceeds the carrying capacity, is it impacting all the other species? And of course, if it's using resources that other species use, then absolutely. So the best signal that we are over the carrying capacity, and you can talk about the whole earth, or you can talk about your neighborhood, doesn't matter, is when you see other things start to decline and disappear. We've got the Endangered Species Act. We've got every day we hear about something else that is in trouble because we are taking the resources that all those plants and animals need. We've lost 3 billion breeding birds in this country in the last 50 years. And I will remind you that a billion is 1,000 million. So we now have 3,000 million fewer birds in this country than we had just 50 years ago. And 50 years ago, it wasn't so hot either. Compared to 100 years before that, there were many, many more birds around. And that's a charismatic species at this point that we're a group of species that we follow. We like birds, but the other creatures are disappearing too. We've got global insect decline. A huge percentage of our plants around the world are endangered. All kinds of nasty things. Get decline of our pollinators. So the life around us is declining because we have usurped, we have taken the resources that they need to thrive away. And the problem with that is those are the species that run the ecosystems that support us. So the more we remove the resources needed for other species, in other words, the more we exceed our carrying capacity, the worse off for us it is. We can view this in a very selfish way. It's not just about losing polar bears or nightjars or any of the other things that are declining. It's about losing ecosystem productivity. Every time we add a person to this planet, we need more ecosystem services, not fewer. That's the problem. And ecologists have estimated that we need 3 Earths to support the population, the 8.2 billion people that we have sustainably. Sustainably means kind of forever. It doesn't mean for the next 5 years.
Right.
So that's the situation where there's more of us than the planet can handle. And a lot of people say, well, we should live more simply, we should, and it's true. We can do things to increase the carrying capacity, or at least to extend the time before we all crash and burn. Nobody wants to give anything up. It's very hard to ask people to give something once you have it. So we say, well, we should not drive our SUVs, and we should give up this and give up that. And we should, but it's a really hard message, and it doesn't work. So one of the things we can do, I mean, the ultimate answer here, and it's people don't want to even talk about it, is we've got to control our population growth. We cannot grow forever on this planet. It's just, it's a finite planet. And so we got to get that under control. Assuming we do, how can we increase the Earth's carrying capacity? One of the ways we've decreased it is to remove the plants from the planet. We got 44 million acres of lawn out there. Lawn,
Yeah.
that's it's green, but it's 2 inches tall. That used to be forested or healthy meadows or anything else. So we've removed those plants. We've cut down more than half of the forests on the planet, and all that carbon is up in the atmosphere right now, by the way. So putting the plants back would not only help climate change, because of course plants are pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and building their tissues out of it, but they're also pumping the carbon, the extra carbon they fix through photosynthesis into the soil for long-term storage. It will stay in the soil thousands of years if we don't disturb the soil. So putting the plants back will help the biodiversity crisis. It will help climate crisis. It will manage our watersheds. It will reduce pollution. It will moderate our weather. It will do all kinds of wonderful things. But we have to put the plants back, and not just in Yellowstone. We got to put them back everywhere. Now
Mm-hmm.
I know we've got agriculture and we've got cities, so we have to do the best we can, which is a whole lot better than what we're doing right now.
Definitely. And when you were talking, I'm thinking in my mind, like, what do you think is the best signal for us, to see? I mean, I guess we're seeing a collapse in many species, but do you think the best signal is plants, insects, or maybe both? Like, what gives us like the best pulse for the health of the earth in terms of species?
Right. We humans don't tend to notice invertebrates.
Mm-hmm.
We don't. If we see an insect, we kill it. And it's the loss of insects would be a very good measure, but it's something we tend not to notice. That statistic about declining birds got people's attention because we do
Mm-hmm.
notice birds. When you go out in your yard, how many birds do you see there? How many birds do you see compared to what was there before it was your yard? So those things, looking at the vertebrates, particularly the warm and fuzzy ones, are
Mm-hmm.
the signals that get people attention. But really, the most important things, really, it is the loss of plants and the insects that transfer energy from those plants to other animals. Those are the two most important groups. Now we've caught on that pollinators are important. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have 90% of our flowering plants if you don't have the pollinators, and that's good. We've caught on to that so much that people think the only important insects now are pollinators.
Mm-hmm.
They are critically important, but they're only half of the story. The other half of the
Right.
insects that support the food web, and I can generalize and say those are caterpillars. We got to put the caterpillars back. And that's not something people are thinking about very much at all.
That's so true. When I saw your presentation and you were talking about the caterpillars, that it takes, I think you said 9,000 caterpillars to raise one clutch of chickadees. Or do I have that right? And the other thing I wanted to say really quick is that my yard is 95% native. The insect, the pulse of the insects is there, but when I go to my neighbor's yard, which is just lawn, or my other neighbor's yard is just lawn, there's barely a pulse. And I have thought about the sound of crickets and grasshoppers and the insects as the pulse of the earth, like literally the pulse of the earth, like your pulse, you're taking your pulse. And when you go into the national forest, like Nantahala National Forest, I used to be a botanist for Nantahala National Forest. I would sleep in certain areas. It was so loud. Or, you go to the tropical ecosystem. That's what our ecosystem should sound like. It should be this hum, this pulse, and we barely have it anymore. We have to listen really hard. And so that to me is so true. Like, it's a very good indicator. So if your yard, you can't hear crickets really loud at night, maybe after you implement what Doug teaches you, you will start to hear and it will get louder. But anyway, I know you wanted to say something because I saw you raise your finger.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. I got it. You said take 9,000, 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to get one clutch of chickadees, to the point where they leave the nest, but the parents continue to feed them caterpillars for another 21 days. So and nobody's counted that. So when you add it all up, it's really tens of thousands of caterpillars for that one clutch of chickadees, which is a third of an ounce. Let me just
Wow.
point out one important thing here, because this is confusing to people. You drive down the road and you look, and there's trees on both sides of the road. You see plants everywhere, and it just sounds like, what Doug Tallamy says is nonsense, because there are plants everywhere. We're doing fine. All plants are not equal in their ability to support that ecosystem, to support that food web, and that's the key. And that's where the native plant issue
Mhm.
comes in. Plants from other continents don't support the insects that run the food web. So when you drive down the road, I don't know where you are, but chances are really good that you're looking at a mass of invasive plants from Asia. That's certainly what I see when I drive down my roads around here. Porcelain berry and bamboo and multiflora rose and oriental bittersweet and bush honeysuckle. We've got 9 species of privet that are invasive in this country, 1 million acres of privet in Alabama alone, kudzu. I mean, it's on and on and on. So much of the green we see out there is not productive. It's not supporting the food web the way we need it to. So that's an important caveat. It's not just green, it's got to be the right green.
Mm-hmm.
The difference.
That's important. And so you have seen, because you're working with people that are transforming their yard into native plants, right? And you've seen, and I'm sure people have emailed you and told you, Doug, after I did this, I've seen that. Can you share any success stories with us for people that had maybe predominantly non-native invasives, which I like how you call them statues, like the ginkgo plant is a statue, I think that's a great way of looking at it. So lots of us have
Right.
statues.
It's a
Lots of
different.
my neighbors have statues, maybe a success story. And then we could go into what natives. So for people, there are listeners around the world, but most of the listeners are in North America. And if you're not in North America, you could get a book, on native plants for your area, but maybe some important native plants. And I know this is going to be East Coast, Central United States centered. But anyway, I would love
Okay.
to hear a success story.
I do get emails all the time from people say, I'm doing this, I've done this, and it happens right away. It's really rewarding. But of course, I'm not there measuring what
Mhm.
they've done. I have been measuring what's happening at our own house. Remember, it started as a field mode for hay, and we have been measuring the number of birds that now breed on our property or have bred since we've been here, and the number of moth species, because those are the insects making the caterpillars that allow those birds to reproduce. And I take pictures of every moth species I find, and I've been doing it for 8 years now. So I got 62 species of birds that have bred on our property and 1,337 species of moths that I have taken pictures
Mm.
of so far. That's a success.
Wow.
I can quantify. And of course, all the other things that have come back as well. Wood frogs came to our property last year. After 23 years, they finally showed up. So there's still things that are colonizing our restoration. We have wood thrush that breed on our property. That's a forest bird.
Mm.
When we moved in, it was a field. So we put the forest back, at least on portions of our property, and it's enough to support wood thrush breeding. Those are all measures of success that I can document because we've got that. But other people are seeing the same thing, and then it really is rewarding.
It is. I mean, my yard is 95% natives. A lot of them I let just come up. So the passion that have passion flower on this side, and it was just one little twig or like one little vine, and I just cleared it a little bit around it so it could grow. And now the whole west side of the yard is pure passion flower, and I called it the birthing center, the fritillary birthing center. There will be hundreds, and I mean hundreds of fritillary butterflies. And I have seen indigo buntings on the land, like yellow rumped warblers. We have a lot of neotropical migrants that come to this yard. And of course, I have a bird bath and I get to see them bathe, which is awesome. And just like I should really, because I'm a botanist, but I really should start taking pictures like you have, because when you're doing your presentations and you see all those moth species or all those birds, you can tell the story. And I have all these I think all these birds and caterpillars and insects and butterflies. I mean, it's really the most beautiful. This yard is so beautiful in the spring and summer with all the butterflies, like the zebra longwing and monarchs. Of course, we have so many, and to be able to tell that picture. So and I love what you said in your presentation that I saw at Charleston Museum, that we don't need to go to a national park to witness nature. We need to be able to witness nature in our yards. And by planting natives and having natives and wild herbs, you will literally be able to witness nature. And yeah. And can you tell? Because a lot of people, see their yard as separate from them or the nature. Can you talk about how important it is for us to go outside and connect with the nature right in our yard and what that does for our health?
Yeah.
Over.
Because we do have parks and we do have preserves. We got the national parks, we've got land conservancies, and people are preserving as much land as they possibly can. But almost all of them, well, all of them are islands. They're isolated, surrounded by development. What's that develop? That's where we live. It's where we live, where we work, a little bit where we play. But it's no man's land for most of the things that live in those little habitat fragments. So they can't go outside of the habitat fragment, which means the population within that habitat fragment is small. And when it fluctuates, and they all do fluctuate, a lot of times small populations hit zero and they blink out of their little habitat patch. So the key is connecting the habitat patches by making viable habitat in between them. What's in between them? Our yards. That's why putting nature back in our yards is so important because it helps the nature that is in those habitat fragments survive in the long term. It increases the amount of area that we're giving back to nature. The idea that humans and nature can't coexist is we've had that idea for hundreds of years, but we've got to get rid of it because we
Mhm.
have to coexist. We need ecosystem function everywhere. And everything we do on our property impacts our local ecosystem positively or negatively.
Mhm.
I talk about your yard is not like Las Vegas. You know, in Las Vegas, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens on our yards does not stay on our yard. So if we have a big lawn, it's impacting the watershed, it's impacting local pollinators, the food web, carbon sequestration. The plants we choose, whether they're native or not, whether they're invasive or not, are going to impact everything around us. So the decisions, the landscaping decisions we make on our property have a huge impact that most people haven't considered because it's we've had this idea that nature's someplace else and I'll do whatever I want. Where
Yes.
that's what we have to give up.
I agree. We'll like get in our car, drive to nature. And I still love going to the national forest, but it is nice to be able to see my daughter interact with a monarch or see a chrysalis, to see we do have like lizard snakes, we have a hawk, like so we have the whole food web. And I support all of it. I support all of it. I'm like, I'm not scared of snakes, but they're non-poisonous. They're all non-poisonous, but I know that they're eating the wood rat population, so it is you do have to open up a little bit. I mean, my yard is wild. It's 0.7 acres. It's probably more wild than maybe most people listening would let their yard get. But just you listening could plant some, like you mentioned, goldenrod. Do you have some, like a plant list, like a hit list? Like try and get these ones.
I talked about caterpillars earlier, the bread and butter of terrestrial food webs, the meat and potatoes. So the more caterpillars you have, the more healthy your ecosystem is, the more species that are going to be on your property. So what plants make caterpillars? The top plant in 84% of the counties in which they occur is one of our oaks. So if you live in an area where oaks thrive, and you do, that is the very best plant. They support 557 species of caterpillars in the mid-Atlantic states and over 950 species nationwide. And there's no other plant genus that comes close to that. Other important plant genera would be our native prunus, so things like black cherry
Mm.
support 456 species. So do our willows, 456.
Mm. Yeah.
In terms of herbaceous plants, goldenrod is number one, not only in terms of supporting caterpillars, 110 species, but also specialist pollinators. We talk about supporting pollinators, but 30% of our almost 4,000 species of native bees are specialists, just like those caterpillars. They can only reproduce in the pollen of particular plants. So you have to have those plants or you don't have those pollinators. And if you have goldenrod, perennial sunflowers, helianthus, native asters, those three genera alone will give you somewhere around 40 species of native bees that won't be in your property if you
Mm.
don't have those plant genera. Um, so there are plants. We're talking about native versus non-native. Natives are better than non-natives, but not all natives are really powerful. You want to focus on the ones that we call keystone species.
Mm.
They're supporting most of the life around us.
I
And
like that.
you can find out what the best keystone species for your county is in the
Mm.
US anyway by going to Native Plant Finder on the National Wildlife Federation website and putting in your zip code. And the ranked list of the most best woody plants and herbaceous plants in your county will pop up because it changes as you move around the country.
Yes, and learning what they look like, because so here I have a ton of seaside goldenrod and it's all come up. I haven't planted any of it. And it is is multiplying. I have so many babies I can move around. I have babies I can give people. Then this past year, I had tall goldenrod, Solidago altissima, and that one came up. And now I have this huge patch of Solidago altissima. And so being a botanist, I do have the luxury because I know what they are when they're babies, really small. And so most of the native wild herbs I have in my yard, they have come up from the seed bank, or birds will bring them in. And so very rarely do I have to buy the plants. But for people listening, they could go, like here in Charleston, we have Roots and Shoots, which I saw you have on your website, Homegrown National Park, which we need to segue into. But, that like having the goldenrod and having all those wild herbs has been amazing. And my part of my goal is to teach people how to work with them for medicine. And so goldenrod is a very important medicinal plant. So as you're improving the health of the earth, you're improving your health, and you choose to co-evolve with those plants. So there is a complete connection. Because as a botanist, former botanist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I worked really hard to protect thousands of acres of land for federally endangered plants. But I'm like, wait, there's a missing link. Humans. Like humans don't even know how to go connect with the land anymore. And if everything is, we go to the grocery store, we go, we're just this complete disconnect. So we have to see these plants too as very important food and medicine for us. And then usually that's like the keystone species becomes part of the ecosystem instead of completely separate. And that's what I love about both of our missions, because I think they align very well and intertwine. Because, yeah.
Interject. We're talking about goldenrod, and right away people,
Mhm.
oh, it's going to make me sneeze.
Yeah.
Goldenrod does not make you sneeze. It's ragweed that makes you sneeze. Goldenrod pollen is heavy and it's sticky. It does not float on the wind. It just happens to bloom at the same time ragweed blooms. So people blame goldenrod, but you can plant your goldenrod, you will be sneeze free.
Yes, yes. And you definitely keep your eyes open, and you can find it, growing on the side of the road. You can collect seeds, because what I've found is that you want to get native plants as close to where you are, because they have evolved with the mycorrhizae of the soil, and they will outperform. And so I got Eastern horse mint from a lot across the street, and they mow it all the time. So just dug up a little baby clump, and it has taken off in my yard. Versus if I got it from a nursery that was from far, I've seen some of my friends get Eastern horse mint from nurseries and they look pitiful. And I'm
Mm.
like, that's because that one could have been from another state. So you just want to make sure. I guess if you start with seed, it's different, because the seed that needs to take there will take. But I do think that there are very specific ecological coevolutionary relationships between the native plants in our yard that have been there for millions of years that we can't recreate all the way. So anyway, so let's get into Homegrown National Park. Can you tell listeners what is Homegrown National Park? And for those of you who have native plants, or you are going to, I know you're going to be inspired to plant native plants, how can they join Homegrown National Park?
Homegrown National Park is a small nonprofit. So you can go there. The website is homegrownnationalpark.org. Our mission is to get the message that everybody is responsible for good earth stewardship to the masses that don't know that. What is good earth stewardship? How do we fight against biodiversity loss? Well, you do it by planting the plants that support biodiversity. Those are the native plants. By removing the plants that don't, primarily the invasive plants. And believe it or not, most people do have invasive species on their property. And if people did that right just where they live, it makes this challenge manageable. People tend to think about, oh, the entire earth, there's nothing I can do that'll help the earth. Just worry about the piece of the earth that you can influence. It's typically where you live, the property you own. If you don't own property, then you can help a park or preserve that does. But then you can start this restoration, let's say right at home, and see the results. So we want to get that message to as many people as possible. If you go to our website, you join Homegrown National Park for free. It doesn't cost you anything. And what you do is you register your property on our biodiversity map by putting in your location and then the amount of area that you're going to be a good steward of. So we started Homegrown National Park thinking about we're going to reduce the area of lawn because we do have over 40 million acres of lawn, which is an area bigger than New England. If everybody cut their lawn in half, that'd give us 20 million acres that we could restore at home, which is a bigger area than all the big national parks combined.
Mm.
Homegrown National Park would be the biggest park in the country. So you say, okay, well, I either have reduced the area of lawn or I'm going to, and you put that area in, or maybe I'm going to plant that oak tree, or maybe I'm going to put in that patch of tall goldenrod. That's an area. You estimate the area that is now not lawn, and you put that into the database, and then your little piece of your county lights up with a firefly. And you get to see how many other people in your county have joined Homegrown National Park. And the ultimate mission is to get the entire country to light up with fireflies so that we have
So
some
nice.
viable habitat out there again.
Nice. I love it. So I definitely joined, and I love you have so many wonderful resources on there. So I will put a link to Homegrown National Park and the show notes. So definitely go to that. And I'm also going to share this video on YouTube. So definitely look in the below this video for that link because I think you should go there because there's incredible resources and you should watch another one of Doug's talks with all his amazing pictures. So how do you think, because when I used to be in the government, federal government, we talked all the time as scientists, we're not able to get to the public. And that was one of the reasons why I resigned because I had to teach. I didn't have time to get my PhD and become a professor. So I was like, I'll just start a school. But how are we doing, do you think, at moving the needle forward? Do we need to get out there and shout a little louder, or do you think are you seeing some movement? I'm just
Sure,
curious.
we all need to shout, but we're doing better than you'd think, better than most people think. And I have a 20-year perspective on this, and the needle really has moved. I wrote Bringing Nature Home in 2005. It came out in 2007, and I didn't think anybody would read it. I thought that'd be the end. I was wrong about that. People are still reading it. So the
Wow.
timing just coincidentally happened to be right. What people are excited about is that they can become part of the solution. They feel empowered. They can actually do something at home, see the results. They create their little homegrown national park. They get the health benefits. Their blood pressure drops. Their stress hormone drops. Their cortisol. They're happier people. All these wonderful things happen because they took these little actions. And even if it's still bad news in Africa, at least it's good news where you live. And
Yes.
that's empowering. People really like that. So I can look at the number of talk requests I get as a measure of interest
Mm.
per day. There's no way I can keep up with it because people are really interested. And
Mm.
that's motivating to me because that's
That
we
gives you hope.
yeah, we got to get what do we have 320 million people in this country? And I have not reached them all, believe it or not.
Well, I know that you listening, are going to be super excited, and I hope that you plant some natives. And as a gardener, my biggest recommendation is just to pick an area of your yard that you like to go to and make that your native plant garden. And so I'll give you an example. My daughter just the other day went outside and she did what she called a fairy garden, right? And she did it under a tree and close to the live oak, but enough where there's sun. And so then I was like, wow, this is so beautiful what she just created. And I have just been planting natives and just natives that are popping up in different places. And I dig them up and I move them to this fairy garden. Now, my two front beds are completely native and I have rescued plants. So, a good thing to do is rescue plants from development. And another thing is I pin flag. So, there's all these native plants that are coming up in the lawn, little lawn. It's a weedy lawn. It's not really a lawn, but a little bit. And I pin flag them and then I let them turn into what I call wild herb islands. And it is hard to work with my husband. And it has been some times of contention and like upset and friction, but he's coming along because he's learning, right? It's education. So anyway, so I recommend just picking an area of your yard, turning it into a native plant garden, maybe pin flagging some herbs that you're like, that's not grass. What is that? Because the native plants will colonize your yard. And everybody has native plants in their yard that just don't recognize them. And so even my mom in urban Norfolk, Virginia has these native plants that are hiding. A lot of them hide along the fence lines. And you talk about the fence lines, like my fence line's all wild. If you can let your fence line go wild, that acts as a corridor for the wildlife and the birds. So even that, just letting the fence line go wild. And hopefully, even if you're in an HOA, you can do this. You can make the native plants look pretty. Now they will spread and you'll have to give them to your neighbors. But are there any, before we part, and I want to share some of your resources before we part, but is there anything that you want to tell the listeners before we close or those watching?
I would like to emphasize personal responsibility because
Hmm.
we all totally depend on healthy nature, healthy ecosystems. Whether you like nature or not, everybody needs it. So I think that means everybody has a responsibility to helping to keep it healthy, keep maintaining it. And that's a new thought. Most people thought it was just the ecologist, just the conservation biologist, but no, we all need it. We all need to do it, and it's very easy to do at home. And I do want to point out that you can formality. You can have a formal garden that's all natives. Formality is a function of the design, not the plants in the design. So don't worry that you don't think, oh, native has got to be wild and messy. No, it doesn't. You just have to choose the right plants.
That's a really good point. That's a really, really good point. You can make it look gorgeous, then you have to choose, yeah, the right plants, and you may have to, you know, weed them out because they like to, because they're native, so they reproduce more. And that's just when it comes to sharing. But I love how you say responsibility because as a former botanist for the federal government, protecting federally endangered plants, plants don't receive protection, okay, off of federal property. Endangered plants do not receive protection off of federal property. And even when they're on federal property, the people would always say, "Oh, April, can't we just dig that up and move it?" That was the default when I came into office. And I'm like, no, you cannot just dig it up and move. Can't we just dig this population up and move it to that prairie museum? I'm like, no, because then it's not a functional ecosystem or a functional population. And what Doug was saying, when these populations get small, they brink out. It's true. As an endangered species biologist, if the population was 50 or below, it brinks out. It's on its path to extinction. So, and that's because of the pollinators. If the population is lower than 50, the pollinators aren't coming to visit it. And so that's where that connectivity comes through. And as a neighbor, I have given my neighbors native plants to plant. And so we're creating that connectivity in this neighborhood where I live. And then I teach them how to use them for food and medicine, and they want to plant them even more. But, it is important for you to assume responsibility because the federal government is decreasing. Just 420 of my employees have been fired, laid off, and it is shrinking, and there's going to be way more. So the federal government is saying no. And let me tell you, money always wins, okay? If there's a rare or amazing population of something and it's a lot of money, a big project like building a bridge, the bridge is getting built. So no, we cannot depend on the government. We cannot depend on other people to do this for us. We have to do it. We have to take responsibility, and we take every day so we can give some. So anyway, I could go on and on because I'm all fired up. I'm like, look, right. I'm all fired up. And that's why I love what you're doing, because you are giving people a solution and you're giving them a path. You're giving them a step-by-step process. Plant the natives, join Homegrown National Park. You have resources, you have books. So I recommend getting one of Doug's books. This is Nature's Best Hope. I see you have another one, Bringing Nature Home. Is that another one you wrote? How Can I Help, behind you?
That's the newest one. That's coming out
Okay.
in April.
Wow. So a new book, How Can I Help? Which, give me a link if there's pre-order on Amazon. So definitely look at the links to Doug's books, and they make the most amazing gifts. Thank you. We could talk for another hour, but in respect of your time and respect of you listening, I think you have the path to move forward. And I hope from the bottom of my heart that you do, and that you plant some natives, and that you transform your yard into a thriving ecosystem. And that ecosystem includes you. Many blessings. And thank you so much, Doug.
Take care, April. Thanks.
Take care. Bye. There couldn't be anything more important for us to do right now than support nature. And you can probably hear the birds in the background. It is up to you to plant natives and to protect your yard and to make a difference in the ecosystem that you live in. And know that you are a part of that ecosystem So your health depends upon the health of it as well. All right, I hope you enjoyed this. And if you want to learn more about native plants and wild herbs, I highly recommend checking out our monthly membership in season. You can go to wildherbacademy.com/learn wild herbs. Be well and stay wild.